So we looked at objects in JavaScript. They're basically just collections of properties, as we call them, which are basically just variables, and then functions, or as we call them, methods in the case of objects. Okay, so again, objects are just collections of properties and methods. And so let's space this out so you can see this particular user object here a little bit clearer. So we open the object and we define it with this curly brace. That's the opening statement for it, and then here's the closing curly brace. Everything inside of it is the body of that object. So let's space that out. So as you can see here, we've got an object and it's got one property. Again, it's like a variable. It's first name and it's tied to a string here. It's set up to a string. Another one, another string, and then we've got a function here. So we call that a method. Now, all this data in here, this Joe and this Smith, and even this function, they're tied to a particular user in this case. You know, if we're working with users, we've hard-coded in the name here. Now, there are going to be times when you're going to need to be working with many objects at once. Say you've got a database of users, you know, like 1,000 or 10,000 users that you need to work with. You don't want to be hard-coding every single one of them and then trying to work with those hard-coded users. You know, you might have user Joe here, and then you might create another one, var user Mary, and do the same thing, right? And we would just have to write so much code if we were managing hundreds, thousands, or even in the case of Facebook, billions, right? So the way we get around that is we use in object-oriented programming this concept of classes. Okay, and so we can create a blueprint of one user, just the prototype, the blueprint of a user, and then kind of derive or instantiate other users from that blueprint. Okay, and so that's just going to save us a lot of time and not have to write and hard code everything in for every user. It's going to make our code a little more dynamic and a lot shorter. So the way we can do that in JavaScript, we don't use the word class in JavaScript, we use the word prototype. Okay, in a lot of other languages, you'll say you would create a user class and then create kind of a blueprint of a single user. And then you can kind of create your user objects out of that blueprint. In JavaScript, we say we create a prototype. And the way you do that is like this. You say var, and then capital letter, user. Okay, so it's like creating a variable, but you're using this capital letter notation. That's just the proper way to do it. And then you set it equal to a function. And this is very similar to just, you know, creating an actual function, but it's a little bit different. When you use this capital letter, we're telling everyone, hey, we want to create a prototype here, or a class in other languages. So let's create this prototype of the user. Let's say that we know for sure every user is going to have a first name. So what we'll do is pass it in as an argument. Okay, so, and I'll get rid of this object for now. Okay, so we know for sure that every user is going to have a first name, and why don't we go ahead and give every user a last name as well. Okay, and they'll have their own first name and last name, but we know by default the prototype of each user should have at least this property and this property. And so when we do that, we use a special keyword in JavaScript to set those dynamic properties. And the way we do that is we use this special keyword called this. Okay? And then we're going to go first name and set that equal to whatever gets passed in. In this case, let's pass that down into here. Okay, so this might look a little bit redundant here, but what we're doing is we're passing in this argument here and it's getting sent to right here. Okay, and then what we're saying is anytime we create an object, it's going to have a property called first name and it's set to whatever we pass in. So I'll show you this kind of in action in a second. Let's do the same thing for the last name. We're going to give our user objects another property here called last name. And just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to change this to be a little bit clearer like that, so that we're not using the exact same spellings here for the arguments and the properties. Okay, so we'll do that. Okay, so what we're saying here is, again, we're passing in arguments in this function here, as we create this prototype. And this argument is basically just a temporary variable that we can use inside the function's curly braces. And we're saying, okay, we want to pass in an argument here and another one here. And inside this function, what we're doing is using this special this keyword. And what that means is that when we create a user object, we're going to derive it out of this blueprint, this prototype. They're going to have a property. And this is one property and this is another property. And they'll be set to whatever we pass in here. So let's finish this out. Okay, now follow along. I'm going to create an actual user object. And the way you do that from prototypes, so what you do is you say, might as well store it in a variable. We'll just say this user and his name is going to be Joe. And then we use this special new keyword. So we just learned two new keywords here. We learned this keyword and the new keyword. So follow along. We'll say capital user. And then we're going to pass in two strings. We can put in whatever we want, but we might as well make them sensible. We'll just do a first and a last name. Say Joe and then Smith. Okay, so what we've done here is we've got a blueprint for our users, and then we're actually creating an actual user now here in this line. And now, if I save this, you'll see obviously nothing's going to happen here, but I can do something like this now. I can say Joe F_name, and I'm getting that from here. And it's like what we were doing with the objects video, right? We're able to now have this property for Joe. Okay, and what that will do is output his first name, whatever we passed in here. So let's log this out in the console. See what that looks like. So if I save that, there you go. It's logged it out. It seems kind of simple and it seems a little bit convoluted the way we're passing all this data in. But again, let this kind of absorb, play around with this. And also on that token, you can read a lot more about this on the web. You will see, there's a lot about prototypes and inheritance in JavaScript. Entire books have been written on it, but this is kind of the long short of it. But if you do want to read more about it, I urge you to check out this website, w3schools.com, and you can kind of, read about all of the basics and even advanced stuff of JavaScript here. So we're able to log out those property names like that. And all this is doing, when we're doing this right here, this new keyword, in the computer's memory, it's the same thing as creating an object. We're creating an object that has a property fname. And remember, object notation is like this with the colon. And it's set to Joe. And remember, we also like to write our objects in separate lines. And we comma separate them. And we're another property, which is Smith in this case. So I'm going to comment that out because I want you to imagine that that's what's happening in the computer's memory. When we write this statement here, we're saying, okay, let's take this prototype of a user. Okay, and these users have first names and last names. And we know that we want that to be true for every user. So we create this blueprint, this prototype. And then in this line, we're actually we're telling the computer we want a piece of memory saved and we want it to look like this. And we're going to label it Joe. So this right here essentially translates to this. So again, you can do this like that. You can also add methods as well. You can do, like we were doing with the say hello method, we can give Joe a say hello method and whatnot. So you can add more methods to Joe itself, or you can add methods to the actual prototype. So let's look at that. Let's see what it looks like to add a method to the actual prototype. The way we do that is we say user.prototype now. That's another new keyword. And then we're going to say, just give the function a name. We'll say hello. Set that equal to a function. And we'll just say console.log hello. Just something basic. We can put as many lines as we want in here and make it a really complex function, but we'll keep it simple. So now every user, every time we create a new user like this using the special new keyword, they will be capable of also saying hello. Okay, so we've just given every user that capability. And you can try that out just by typing, you know, a new user here. We'll say Sam. Okay, and then we'll just get Sam to say hello. Remember, you need this parentheses. And there you go. We've just gotten Sam to say hello. So again, this is going to be a little bit more complex and hard to grasp if you're new to object-oriented programming. But this is the general idea. We're creating a blueprint, and then we're actually creating objects in the computer's memory or the browser's memory. And they look like this. Okay, so in the case of Joe, it looks like that. Now that we've added this new function here for all of our users, Sam would actually look like this. Sam would have a first name, a last name, and Sam is able to say hello, which is just going to be a function that just logs out hello to the console. So this is what Sam will look like as an object in the browser's memory. It has these two properties and this method. Okay, so that's how we kind of use prototypes and inherit those properties from the actual blueprint. And remember, you have to use the this keyword to set those properties in the blueprint itself.